some objectives that on the face of it sound worthwhile, but it is a bad bill that should not be supported.
The question is at Clause 1, Michael Wood.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Happy to take a call on the title and commencement for the Point England Development Enabling Bill. It's been an interesting debate to be part of, and I want to reflect on the title that this bill has been given and possibly some more appropriate titles that could apply to it. And Mr Chair, I'd suggest that it could be called quite appropriately the Point England Sir Robert Muldoon Memorial Bill, because this area, of course, is in the former Tamaki electorate, and contained within the bill are some of the kind of centralising tendencies that we saw from that National Party Prime Minister, a willingness to override democratic norms, to override community voices, to override due process. And in the debate that we've heard in this committee stage on this bill, sir, it's been raised time and time and time again that there could have been a better way through this bill, that with a willingness on behalf of the government to sit down and negotiate and look at all of the options, we could have achieved something really good for Point England here. We could have achieved something really good for Point England that met the objective that all of us share, to have a sustainable, enduring and just treaty settlement for Ngāti Pawa. And I don't think there's a member in this House that doesn't support that. That could meet the objectives of supporting the Point England Reserve, which is right here in the title, sir. And that's what we should be focused on. That's what we should be focused on. That reserve has protections under legislation that this Parliament passed in the Reserves Act. And one of the key features of this bill is that it fundamentally changes Point England Reserve. It strips away the existing protections that that reserve has under the Reserves Act. And the core protection in the Reserves Act that the reserve has is the right for the benefits of that reserve to the local community to be paramount. And instead of going through a process to determine that, as we would usually have under the Reserves Act, this bill, the Point England Development Enabling Bill, enables development on that reserve, development that may very well be contrary to the interests of that reserve and the community that it serves. So it runs entirely contrary to the treatment of reserves in this country under the Reserves Act, enabling development, residential development, on a precious piece of public open space, as this bill does and as is reflected in the title of this bill, is simply unacceptable and inappropriate. And let's return again to those first couple of words in the title, Mr Chair, Point England. And we've heard from the Minister and the Chair time and time again through this debate that supposedly this is a reserve which isn't particularly valuable, whose amenity is limited, and we've had the canyard about cows, supposedly. Well, actually, sir, we've heard from submitters, we've heard from members of the community that this is actually an incredibly valued reserve. They've submitted, they've emailed, they've sent us in pictures. This is the land, supposedly, that the Minister doesn't think is of value to the community. But here we have kids in the triathlon, we have people paying killy kitty, and of course we had submission after submission talking about the ecological value of Point England reserves. We had senior ecologists from the Auckland Council saying that at the very least, before we go down this track of revoking reserve status of a piece of reserve land that has significant ecological value in particular...
Order. I am going to interrupt the member, but I am doing it to warn the Minister and the Chair that both by hand gestures and comments he is reflecting on my chairing and that he is to cease. Michael Wood.
Thank you, Mr Chair. And we heard from Auckland Council that because of the ecological value that is inherent in the reserve, and that is also, of course, one of the things that is protected in the Reserves Act that is stripped away by this bill, that there should at the very least have been an ecological assessment to determine whether the development that is enabled by this bill on the site is appropriate, given the flora and the fauna, particularly the fauna that is on that site. But we have, through the course of this debate, not heard any substantive response from the Minister on that point. So, sir, I very proudly stand here with the Labour Party to say that the title of this bill is entirely inappropriate, that this bill itself is not something that we should be supporting, that Point England Reserve is a valued reserve. It is not a site that is appropriate for development. And what we know, of course, is that there is ample opportunity for development in that community. It is currently slated for 20,000 additional homes under the unitary plan. And the way that we do good quality development is to plan it, to have democratic input, and then support it with high-quality public open space. We don't do it by ram-raiding the high-quality public open space in the first instance. In fact, contrary to the principles of good development, this bill, which carves up a valued reserve, compromises good quality development in the future in Point England. Thank you, sir.
The question is that Clause 1 stand part. Those with that opinion will say aye. Contrary opinion will say no. The ayes have it. A party vote is called for. The clerk will conduct a party vote.
New Zealand.